We can start. So, welcome again to Both Sides Now. I'm Jane Stahl, and with me is my partner.
Yep. Hi, everybody. Yergs.
Yeah. So, anyway, I have to say, just going back to our previous episodes in which we talked about Ben Franklin's list of what shall we say, moral development, where he had 13 different virtues that he was working on. That it's been on my mind all week long. And I recognize when I review the list that the one that plagues me the most right now is resolution. And I talked about that a little bit last week, that I have in mind to exercise. I have in mind to vacuum my carpets. I have in mind to declutter my house, and I just can't get to it. So that's the one that I have identified for the next rest of my life that I need to work on more seriously. But I'm kind of done with Franklin in that regard. Although I did find on my bookshelf Ben Franklin's The Art of Virtue that I started reading years ago and didn't get to it. So maybe over the course of the next 6 months or so, maybe I'll get to that and we can get back to good old Ben. But in the meanwhile, I came across my Facebook page an advertisement for a book that it made me laugh, first of all, when I saw the title, and I thought, oh my God, only an English teacher. But the title of this book is Grammar for a Full Life. And I thought, oh man, my students would have loved that I would be talking about how grammar would make their lives better. But I always did. I challenged them. You may remember this from a previous episode, but I always used to challenge them that if you can't see that what we're doing answers one of three big questions in your life: who are you? Why do you do what you do? And how can you make life better for yourself? Then what we are doing is not relevant to the rest of your life. So I always challenge the kids, even when we were studying grammar, if you don't see how this is going to make you answer one of those three questions, ask me and I'll explain it to you. So it made me laugh when I saw the title of this book, Grammar for a Full Life. It made me laugh remembering those challenges that I gave to my students. But when I read the reviews of this particular book, they talked about being very readable, that the author's style, just was easy to process, easy to consume, and that it was really kind of a fun read. So I ordered it from the library and it came in on Saturday, just a couple of days ago. And I read it yesterday, the whole bloody thing.
How big is this
I
thing?
loved it. It is 200.
That's the other thing I remember you teaching is that
200
you
and
never
some
look
pages.
at to see how many.
200 and some pages. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
You
thought,
never
oh,
look at
this is
the
going to
book
take
and
me
see how
weeks.
many.
Yeah. This is going to take me weeks to read through this because it's grammar. It's not a sexy novel. It's grammar. But I just loved everything that I was reading. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I have to buy a copy for my friend Sue Bebeck, because one of the chapters deals with semicolons. And you may remember from a previous episode, I think I probably mentioned this, that I consider people, when I read people's writings and I recognize the proper use of a semicolon, I know that these people are well educated. Now, I didn't say intelligent, but they've been well educated, because not everybody knows how to use a semicolon. And it was so funny when my son was growing up. He would, I recognized that he knows how to use a semicolon. And I pointed that out to him one day, and he's very proud that he knows how to use a semicolon. And my friend Sue Bebeck did not know anything whatsoever about using a semicolon. And it's become her mission over the past 16 years to learn how to use a semicolon correctly. And she's getting pretty damn good. I'm real proud of her. That's really
It's
good.
basically to add an additional relevant thought.
Well,
to the
it's
end of the
got to.
sentence.
There are two big reasons for semicolons, and one of them, one of them is to separate items in a series where the series already has commas.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other one is to connect one complete thought with a subject and a verb with a second complete thought that adds to, that enhances the first complete thought. You want to keep them connected because they are, in essence, connected. And so you use the semicolon instead of a period that really separates them. You use the semicolon to tell the reader, hey, this is an addition, this is an enhancement to the first complete thought. So, but aside from semicolons, okay, and this book talks about semicolons, talks about colons, the importance of the use of a colon, which is two dots,
Right.
and what that's in the chapter called attention. And what the author is talking about is how important the use of language is in order to get a more complete meaning across to your reader, in terms of the importance of what you're saying and in terms of being heard. Let me explain just a little bit. The colon used in a sentence is a stop, just like a rest or whatever, a big rest in music. It's a complete stop. And it says to the reader, now pay attention. I am going to give you examples of what I just said, but pay attention. Okay? Not a comma that kind of slide through. It's a colon that makes you stop and pay attention. I enjoyed his talking about the use of active voice versus, well, active voice has two styles. One's transitive, one's intransitive. So active voice has two different styles in there. If you want to call it styles, isn't quite right. But and then the difference between active voice and passive voice. And what's important in the use, and writers know for the most part that one has more agency using active voice. An active voice, you've got a subject and a verb. You've got something that happens in a sentence and it happens to something. I fed the dog. So you take agency, you have power, being the subject of the sentence, the doer, you've got the action, and then you've got the dog that receives the action. So all those pieces are important. Some action verbs are what we call intransitive, and they don't have objects. The wind whistled through the trees. There's no object to which the wind takes action. Through the trees is something else, but the wind whistled. Okay. Now, passive voice, you take away the actor. The dog was fed. We don't know who fed the dog. There's no agency there. It's really kind of if you're looking to have power in your life, you don't speak or write in passive voice. I fed the dog, as opposed to the dog was fed.
Yeah.
Okay. On the other hand, he also talks about, and I don't remember the examples. There are times to use passive voice when you're not trying to be a big deal, when you're allowing that the issue is so complex that you can't say that one person or even a group was the actor, had total agency. There are so many factors involved. The environment's involved, the history of the issue is involved, or whatever. And so, what you're saying is, there's a humility involved in using the passive voice. And there are times when you don't want to give agency to yourself or to other people primarily. It's a time for people to say, hey, yeah, this happened or this was done. Then you don't know by whom. Okay. So isn't that fun? Don't you love knowing all those things? Yeah. So let me just
talk about feeding the dog.
Yes, go ahead.
The two different, with feeding the dog, that made a lot more sense, and to a how and a why you'd use the two different types of ways until the dog was fed.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And I never really understood the use of the term agency until recently. And this book helped me understand it more. It's like, listening to all the TV programs in politics and listening to all the TV programs and lawyers and saying, well, in order to have a lawsuit, you have to have standing. I didn't understand what that meant. And nor did I understand what having agency meant. And it means, having power, being in a position, being an agent of change, as it were. And now I understand it a little bit better. So I just love when I learn new things that I kind of took for granted before, or that I was confused about before, or that I had no idea what was going on. But let me read a couple of paragraphs from this book as he states his mission. And he says, I self-consciously, and his name, by the way, is Lawrence Weinstein, and he is a professor and head of the Writing Center and co-founder of the Writing Center at Harvard University. So he knows what he's doing. Anyway, he says, as he was thinking about language and as he was thinking about writing this book, he says, I self-consciously began to note the effects of my grammatical choices on my own quality of life. Which of those choices of language left me feeling off or constrained? Which provided me a taste of being whole and capable? And to pursue the matter, get this, I at times even took my own vital signs, in a manner of speaking. Respiratory rate? I felt I didn't breathe as freely when I avoided the use of the first person pronoun as I, me, those pronouns, as when I first employed it. Energy? Paradoxically, mine was maximized, not by speaking solely in the energetic active voice. I sold 20 cars this week. Now you've hit the nail on the head, and so forth, but by fusing active voice with passive. So, and he talks about a change in temperature, the use of an ellipsis, that's 3 dots, the deliberate omission of information known already to me and my reader warmed up my relations with that person by tacitly acknowledging a history we shared, and I felt warmer. And, he goes on to say that you, my reader, will have to judge these matters for yourself. But for me, at least, there now seems to be no qualities we long to bring out in ourselves and embody, from decisiveness at urgent moments to a steady consciousness of life's mysteries, that can't be further realized by replacing certain verbal habits with new ones, if we make those changes intentionally. And so that was part of his introduction, why he started it and how he started it and all that. And I thought it might be interesting also, just as an introduction, to share with you some of the table of contents. He talks about getting noticed, as I talked about colons already, tell you to pay attention. Tapping energy comes in the use of transitive verbs in the active voice. And he says certain prepositions, using certain prepositions will help understand the complexity of a situation if you use those to start a sentence. Um, and then he talks about grammar for creative passivity. It helps us be humble, provide blessings, you know. And he talks about Emily Dickinson's use of dashes. But beyond that, now the book gets a little more serious, which is why I was able, not serious, more introspective, more not just style, but also quality of life. Because he talks about you used certain grammar for belonging, how you phrase things, what words you use in, in giving a clear message, in bonding with people, in showing your generosity and your ability to compromise but not be compromised can be facilitated depending on the grammar you use. Another chapter, grammar for freedom, grammar for morale, grammar for mindfulness, and then finally grammar for the end. And he talks about, our dying and, some of the phrasing that one uses at the end of life, one's own or someone others or some other person's. But again, I I loved it. I thought it was just great fun to read and very, very interesting. It's a book for enhancing the human spirit. It's a book you know, um, for understanding who you are. And because we each have a style of conversation, a style, our particular use of grammatical phrases and so on, the way we speak and the way we write shows who we are. So, what do you think? Isn't that exciting? Aren't you happy to know all these things? You are silent. I can't hear you. Not sure why.
Yep.
So,
Sorry, no, I muted so I could type, and
oh,
uh,
okay.
they're so aggressive. You had mentioned earlier about yeah, I'm going to mark that so I take that out too. You had mentioned earlier about the use of semicolons
Yeah.
indicating that somebody is well educated.
Yes.
Just in that last segment where you talk about his book is grammar for freedom, morale,
Mm-hmm.
dying. Um,
Mindfulness, belonging.
yeah, it really does. I mean, I can't help but wonder when you had said that the the where is it? C.S. Lewis books were the Republican playbook. I can't help but wonder if politicians read this as well to be convincing during, or attorneys maybe, to be convincing during speeches on the floor of Congress or arguments
Mm-hmm.
in court.
Mm-hmm. I'm certain. Yeah,
To
maybe not
use
this particular book, but yeah. Yep, 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 yep. Anyway, so I found it interesting. Also, he talks about today's use of the pronoun they. We're getting away from using he, she. You know, it. We're getting away from using those singular pronouns because it's annoying. It's um, it's a waste of words always to say he, she, but we want to be politically correct and include not only men by using the word he, but also women. So instead, what we're getting to today is the use of they, which, he suggests that maybe it might limit our respect or our joy to use they entirely. And maybe makes a bit of an argument, not a strong one, but a bit of an argument that maybe we should not be so quick to get rid of the use of he and she. So I thought that was kind of interesting because I hadn't thought about that particular thing before.
Are you saying the
I
use of he, the use of he and she in singular only?
Yes, you
Because I
know,
mean, I
well,
wouldn't use he to describe you.
no, but when we're talking more generally, like it's always good for one to announce when he or she is coming to the party.
Okay.
Okay. The subject of that sentence is singular, one. It's always good for
Right.
one.
Right.
But then to refer back to it, just to say it's always good for one to announce when he is coming to the party eliminates, you know, the
Right.
female persuasion, as it were. And so
Right.
we're getting more used to saying it's always good for one to announce when they are coming to the party. And it violates the subject verb agreement, but it gives respect, I suppose, or inclusion. That's it. It gives inclusion not just to the male, but also the female part of the human being, the human race. I
Right.
found it interesting too in my own speech, in my own, use of language, that some of the things he talks about, like in the section about semicolons, he said semicolons, allow people to enhance what they're talking about, as I said before. And I use in my speech, and sometimes in my writing, I use the phrase, let me explain, all the time, because that helps me get the attention of my audience quickly and they know what's coming. I'm going to give an example or I'm going to enhance what I've just said before. And I found it interesting to find myself and what I have used in my own in my own habits and my own verbal linguistic habits. Okay. I thought that was kind of neat. So there's another one, and of course I can't find it in my notes today, but there's another thing that I use in order to grab attention. I would just use the word "and so" because it makes people stop. And then they are able to, the brain is able to take a break and say, oh, okay, I'll get ready now because she's really going to say something that's important to her. So those uses of little phrases like that,
Did
I
you ever
was reminded
notice?
of.
Did you ever notice that foreign languages don't have sentence structure like that?
Well,
They,
there
they're
are,
even. It's much more simple. The
yes.
overall sentence structure.
Well, there are several types of sentence structure. There's, and now I'm losing my memory here, I know, but there's analytic and there is, I think it's called inflectional. Like the
Okay.
Russian language, for example, is different than English because a suffix, you add a suffix, and that determines the meaning of the sentence. The suffix does, not the word order. There's word order, sentence structure. You know,
Mhm.
I kicked the cow is a different sentence than the cow kicked me.
Right.
Okay. Word order matters in English. In Russian, it's the suffixes that matter. And
Okay.
I had to laugh because I heard one little bitty news piece from probably Fox News somewhere that was making fun of Biden because he mispronounced Alex Navalny's wife's name. And the reason is because the female in Russian gets a different word ending, gets a different suffix. It ends with ya, Naval, and so I was reminded of sentence structure there. So, yes, other languages, some languages depend on word order, English does, and other languages depend on suffixes and so forth. You can put
Right.
you can say I kicked the cow in Russian by, I kicked, or the coweth. You can change the word order. It doesn't matter. What matters are the suffixes. I used to have a good example of this when I was teaching, but I've lost it. What can I tell you? I did always use I kicked the cow, though.
And Russian as well?
No, I
No.
gave an English example of it with Russian word suffixes to explain that you could change the word order in Russian. It didn't matter. What mattered were the suffixes that you added. So that was fun.
Gotcha.
I had a lot of fun while I was teaching. What can I tell you? Let's see.
That's
What else?
that's a good thing.
What else? What else? What else? What else? What else? What else? Certain prepositions tell how things are done, which I think is really kind of funny. I remember in prepositions, oh, this is a fun story. I can remember sharing with my students that I realized that when children were learning language, they, of course, learned nouns first. They learned verbs second. Other parts of speech came later, but the last ones that were learned were prepositions. And I had a really cute story about my daughter when she was 2, and it was Easter time, and we had hidden the colored eggs all over the house, right, so that she could find them. All right. And there were some she was looking for, and we tried to explain to her that the eggs she was looking for was behind the TV. And so we said, it's behind the TV. And she looked at the TV. And I said, no, not at. So she looked on top. I said, not on. So she looked beside. And then she looked under.
Wow.
Okay. And I realized at that moment, as a mom and an English teacher, that prepositions were the last part of speech
Yeah.
that children learned. And that was an enlightening moment. And I loved that.
I remember.
And yet they're very, very important parts of speech because they tell how one thing is related in space and time to another thing. Okay. Because things bear different relationships in space and time with other things, and prepositions are really important in helping. Aren't you glad you came? Aren't you glad you came today? I mean, seriously, that's what I used to tell the kids all the time.
Even struggling to learn how to spell preposition.
Oh, in junior high, when you were there, and I think you were just part of my gifted group. You weren't part of my English class, but my English students at the time, when we at Junior High West, when I was there, we were back to basics and we were studying grammar like it really mattered. And so when we got to prepositions, the assignment for my student was to memorize 54 prepositions. And it began aboard, about, above. And, the kids took it as a real assignment and could memorize all those prepositions, which was just absolutely amazing. But we had fun with it, board, about, above. Yeah. Those are the only thing I think I've ever memorized. Mm-hmm. Yes. So anyway, so there's that. What else can I share with you from my notes here? Of course, I thought it was interesting. I have some notes here about, we were talking about verbs and transitive verbs and intransitive verbs. And he goes on to say you don't always want to use active, and you certainly don't always want to use passive, but sometimes you have hybrids. You use both, one and or the other. For example, the use of may. You call on, and I forget exactly, but passive voice you want to use in order to call on. And he talks in there about the goddess, a Hindu goddess by the name of Kali, that destroys ego, destroys the negative forms of ego. And using the hybrid active passive constructions helps to do that. It keeps you humble. It keeps you humble and yet still in the game. So he also talks about, like I said, Dickinson's use of dashes. So that's kind of fun. Anyway, for freedom's sake, in the chapter for freedom's sake, there are 3 examples of that if you want to know. And one of them is you use I statements. And everybody knows this. I shouldn't say everybody. Maybe everybody knows it, but not everybody practices it. That you shouldn't say, you're an idiot. When you when you when you don't flush the toilet. There. Okay. You want to say, I am annoyed. So that gives you, again, more agency and more freedom. So there's also time to lose the forms of I when it gets to be way too ego motivated. And interestingly, he talks about, and I forget, I shouldn't have brought this up because I don't remember exactly, but he talks about something about names, that there is an instruction, may you be as dust. And yet he talks about how in the Bible, men are made of dust. And so, if somebody gives a criticism like, may you be of dust, or, to dust you shall go away. He reminds us in this book that God made men of the dust of the earth, which means that it gave men legitimacy, which I thought was really kind of a different way to look at legitimacy. Oh, yes. In the book on freedom, he talks about words that give credit and respect for people who maybe are not book learned. Okay. And he says those kinds of words are like actually, and you're giving a homespun example. You're not relying on some intellectual, learned kind of big deal book, but the adverb actually, prefaces the fact that I'm going to give you a pretty down home example here. And my way of doing that in my speech, I remembered while I was reading the book, I used the phrase, here's the thing. Here's the thing. And that alerts my listener once again that I'm going to talk in plain language here.
My
Okay.
neighbor uses that one a lot. We
So
talk
does
politics and whatever else, and
does Obama. So does Obama. That was one of his phrases that I recognized we shared. I felt so good about that. He would always use, here's the thing. So I like that.
he just did one. Some Republican said something incredibly stupid, and I forget what it was, but his first counter to it was he stops reading the quote, and then he goes, okay, so number
Yeah.
one,
Yeah.
what? You make no sense. And everybody just starts cracking up laughing.
Yeah. Right. There are people in my life whose verbal habits are really kind of interesting. Yeah, I'm not going to name them at this particular time. But let me go on here. Another thing he talks about to help one's morale is to pay attention to the end focus of your sentences. And it's, when we're talking about end focus, it's before the but or after the but. Because when you want somebody to remember something, You focus on the end. So whatever comes after but is what people pay attention to. Okay.
Okay.
So that I think is, it gives you what? It allows you to have the attention where you want it. And then I liked his chapter. Um, I liked his chapter. What was it? For morale. And one of the things he quotes an Indian phrase: God gives each of us a song. I love that. I mean, that's a beautiful phrase. And it underscores one of his points that we each have different habits, verbal and linguistic habits, and we should be mindful of them. Sentence length matters. And I loved the time he gave to talking about how sometimes you want to use really long, compound, complex sentences, and then sometimes just a word as a
Yeah.
complete sentence, or a two-letter or two-word sentence that maybe doesn't have a subject and verb. But again, it gives you agency, it gives you attention by altering the sentence length. Repetition, obviously, repetition in the way you're trying to make a point and there are three things you want to remember and you start each of those things with the same phrase. The repetition helps in the memory. In his chapter on mindfulness, he is very interested in establishing credibility and avoiding the use of language that we hear all over the media today and all over politics that hypes up something. It makes it super extreme and fear. And
Outrage.
so outrage, right. Yep, 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 yep. And then, he talks about, in this mindfulness part that, yeah, okay, so the barn's burnt down, but now you can see the moon. And so talking in extreme language is a real turnoff. And it is a real, what do you say, destroyer of people's joy when you institute all the fear. Yes, things happen, but it's not the end of the world. The sun will come up tomorrow. Now, yeah, the barn's burnt down, but now I can see the moon. Think about that. I think that's really cool. Yeah. So, he talks a little bit about verb tenses, which I really could not get into very much. Although what I took from that chapter was the need to be fluid, the need to adjust. Yeah, sometimes you want to say something in the present tense or in the future tense. You want to lose the word will in, writing grants, for example. And because really what you're trying to say is not that you will, but you intend to. And so he finds the word will sometimes annoying, I guess, as much as anything. So there. Tolerating ambiguity, recognizing, and this was the part of the book that I really, the fun parts for me were talking about colons and semicolons and transitive and all that, because that's what English teachers love. But toward the end of the book, as you had thought maybe the book was about, the end of the book really was some kind of urging toward accepting uncertainty, toward avoiding preoccupation or obsessiveness, toward tolerance, toward freedom, toward mindfulness and morale, maintaining good morale, that is. I mean, it got a little self-helpy toward the end, which I like also.
Yeah.
That's part of my shtick as well. So anyway, that's Grammar for a Full Life, and I recommend it to
Very nice.
everyone.
Yeah, I definitely can't help but think that some of the Republicans aren't pulling from that, and Democrats as well.
Sure.
One of the things we learned in the police academy was that it's all about articulation. A rookie who takes a gym bag full of marijuana can get the former owner for possession, but the sergeant who knows how to examine it sees that the marijuana is separated into individual sandwich bags.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's intent to distribute
Mm-hmm.
because it's already pre-packaged to sell, not one big gym bag of marijuana, but
Mm-hmm.
each individual sandwich bag.
Mm-hmm.
And the rookie didn't know to look for that. He's just
Mm-hmm.
happy to get this marijuana off the street. But the
Mm-hmm.
sergeant, knows to look for that separation. And now we got a dealer, or maybe just a mule, but probably a dealer. And is it a certain weight? Because in
Right.
drug law, having a certain amount is also additional felonies as opposed to just
Mm-hmm.
misdemeanors. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this is right up that same alley
Yep.
in using, a subject like you understood but not expressed versus actually putting a subject in it or making that subject yourself to
Yep.
really
Yep.
emphasize yourself.
Yep. 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 Anyway, so I'm sure we've been talking for quite a while.
Got a good 42 minutes.
Well, there you go. So I think that grammar for grammar for a full life gave us a full episode.
Very much so. An educational one.
I'm glad you enjoy. As I used to say to the students, aren't you glad you came today to learn
Yes,
a thing that you didn't expect to learn and maybe have a little bit of fun learning it as well?
always.
Anyway, I'm Jane Stahl,
And I'm Jurgs.
and this is
Both
Both
sides now.
Sides Now.
That was better than last week.